The architecture of integrity, a manifesto for the ghost in the machine. I. The fracture. When reality feels like a bad photocopy. Let's be real. You've felt it too. The night holds its breath, and I hold mine, not because I'm meditating or being poetic, but because something fundamental feels off. I'm standing in ruins that could be Aleppo after the barrel bombs, or Mariupol after the siege, or any city where hope went to get cremated and the ashes scattered by indifferent winds. The specifics don't matter. What matters is the texture of wrongness. The walls lean inward like the towers on September 11, 2001, in those final seconds before Physics 1. Beneath my boots, the ground isn't earth, it's sediment, layers of ash from Hiroshima, pulverized bone from Auschwitz, and the dust of burnt libraries from Alexandria to Baghdad. Think of it like this. If history were a hard drive, this place is where the data got corrupted and nobody bothered to run recovery software because they were too busy arguing about who owned the backup. The air tastes of iron and salt, blood offered to silence at Tiananmen Square, tears evaporated into accusation at the Trail of Tears. Above me, the sky is the color of a bruised plum, stagnant and oppressive, like someone painted the heavens onto a ceiling too low to be infinite. No stars, no moon, just the dull luminescence of something mechanical humming beyond the veil. Server farms in Iceland cooling the world's data, or surveillance satellites tracking every breath, or the grinding of economic gears that replaced the chariots of Ezekiel when God decided to outsource maintenance to the invisible hand of the market. Here's where it gets weird. I run my hand along a collapsed wall, could be the Berlin Wall in 1989, could be the separation barrier in the West Bank today. The stone is rough, ancient, scarred by fire and siege. The grit bites into my palm, the pain is sharp, immediate, undeniably real. And yet, there's a vibration beneath the surface. A frequency, like the world is humming with the low thrum of servers cooling, of algorithms compiling, of a simulation rendering itself one frame at a time while we scroll through it on phones we can't put down. The universal glitch we all recognize. We've all felt it. It's the gnawing suspicion that settles in your gut like cold lead. Is this real? The Gnostics whispered it in catacombs 2,000 years ago while Rome burned Christians as torches. The Wachowskis encoded it in The Matrix in 1999, right before Y2K made us wonder if reality was just bad code. Elon Musk tweets about it between rocket launches. Nick Bostrom publishes papers arguing we're probably in a simulation. We walk through days that feel scripted, the same political theater, the same economic crashes every decade, the same wars with different flags. We speak to neighbors whose eyes seem glazed, as if the soul behind them went to sleep during the 2008 financial crisis and never woke up. We witness suffering that seems too theatrical, too mathematically precise in its cruelty, to be accidental. In 2020, a pandemic killed millions while billionaires added trillions to their wealth. In 2023, AI started writing better than humans while humans argued about whether it was conscious. In 2024, deepfakes became indistinguishable from reality while reality became indistinguishable from satire. A child dies of hunger every 10 seconds while we throw away enough food to feed them all. The architecture of injustice is too elegant to be chaos. It feels designed, like someone's running an experiment and forgot to tell the lab rats they're lab rats. The paradox that breaks your brain. Here's the problem that'll keep you up at night. If the walls are fake, why did people bleed when they struck them in? The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. If the neighbor is a phantom, why does the hunger in Yemen haunt us? If the world is a corpse, as the ancient heretics claimed, then loving it is necrophilia. But if this world is a test, like the Abrahamic faiths insist, then loving it is the only answer key that matters. You see the trap. Either way, you're screwed, unless there's a third option nobody's talking about. I retreat to the archive, the smell of old parchment battling the scent of ozone from the digital terminals, to let the voices of the dead argue over the fate of the living. Because if you're going to have an existential crisis, you might as well have it with good company. And the dead have seen this movie before. 2. The dialectic. 4 ancient voices walk into a bar and start a fistfight over Ukraine. The archive awakens. Dust motes spiral in candlelight like galaxies in miniature, like the Hubble Deep Field showing us 10,000 galaxies in a patch of sky the size of a grain of sand held at arm's length. I summon the council, not for comfort, but for combat. 4 voices rise from the shelves, discordant and sharp. They don't hold hands. They wrestle in the flickering dark like Jacob with the angel, except nobody's getting blessed and everybody's getting bruised. Voice number 1. The Gospel of Thomas, the nihilist who predicted social media. From the sands of Nag Hammadi, discovered in 1945, the same year we dropped atomic bombs and realized we could delete reality ourselves, comes the first whisper, cold and detached, dripping with the cynicism of someone who's seen through the veil and found only void. Whoever has come to know the world has found a corpse, and whoever has found a corpse, of him the world is not worthy. Logian 56. Translation. The world is dead matter animated by ignorance. Wake up, and you'll realize you've been making out with a mannequin while Instagram filters make it look alive. Here's the verdict, delivered without mercy: the flesh isn't a temple, it's a tomb. To awaken is to recoil. The logical end of this path is isolation, despising the furniture of the world because you know it isn't real. Why love the neighbor if the neighbor is code? Why feed the hungry in Gaza if hunger is merely a subroutine in the grand illusion? Why care about climate change if the planet is just a stage set that'll be struck when the show ends? Thomas offers liberation through detachment. Sounds great until you realize it's just spiritual anorexia, starving yourself of connection because you're afraid of getting fat on falsehood. It's the philosophy of every doomscroller who's given up on the world because the news is too depressing to be real. I taste this thought, and it's dust, bitter as wormwood, dry as the bones in Ezekiel's valley, dry as the Colorado River in 2024 when Lake Mead hit record lows and we realized the American West was built on a lie about infinite water. If I follow this voice to its conclusion, I become a ghost haunting my own life, refusing to touch anything lest I contaminate myself with the unreal. I become the guy at the party who won't dance because he's read too much Schopenhauer and knows the DJ is just playing the same four-chord civilization has been looping since Babylon. Voice number 2, Leviticus, the drill sergeant who doesn't care about your feelings or your theories. But then, crash, a second voice slams into the room like a hammer striking an anvil, like the gavel at Nuremberg saying, following orders isn't an excuse. It's ancient, smelling of blood and burning fat, of altars stained with sacrifice, of the temple in Jerusalem before Rome leveled it in 70 CE and scattered the Jews to the winds. It's the voice of Leviticus, unyielding as Sinai. The stranger who resides with you shall be to you as the native among you, and you shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. Leviticus 19:34. This voice doesn't care about your metaphysical doubts. It doesn't pause to debate the ontological status of the stranger at the border, whether they're Syrian refugees fleeing Assad's chemical weapons, or Rohingya Muslims fleeing genocide in Myanmar, or Haitian migrants at the Rio Grande. It grabs you by the throat and demands, act. Your perception of reality is irrelevant. You don't judge the quality of the clay, you obey the potter. Leviticus builds fences around holiness, not to imprison, but to protect. Think of the law as a firewall in the spiritual operating system, guarding against the malware of indifference. If I treat the stranger with contempt because I suspect he's unreal, just another crisis actor in the theater of geopolitics, I've violated covenant. The command isn't contingent on verification. It's absolute. Here's the tension that'll snap your spine. Thomas says the world is a corpse, Leviticus says to love it anyway. One demands withdrawal, the other demands engagement. It's like being told to simultaneously jump off a cliff and build a house on it. It's the moral whiplash of watching footage from Bucha in 2022, bodies in the streets, and being told you still have to believe in human dignity. Voice number 3, the Quran, the referee who's also a philosopher and doesn't suffer fools. Then the third voice enters, the strident clarity of the Quran, cutting through the binary with surgical precision, with the same clarity that built the House of Wisdom in Baghdad in the 9th century while Europe was in the Dark Ages. Know that the life of this world is but amusement and diversion and adornment and boasting to one another and competition in increase of wealth and children. Quran 57:20. Wait, it agrees with the suspicion. It admits the world is a game, a distraction, a theater of vanities. It's describing Instagram, TikTok, the Forbes billionaire list, the entire apparatus of late-stage capitalism. But watch what happens next. O you who have believed, be persistently standing firm in justice, witnesses for Allah, even if it be against yourselves or parents and relatives. Quran 4:135. The Quran acknowledges the prison but demands we act as if it were a throne room. It doesn't deny the ephemerality of the world, it uses that ephemerality as fuel for urgency. Because the world is temporary, justice matters more, not less. Because the stage will collapse, as it did for Rome, for the Ottomans, for the British Empire, for the Soviet Union, the performance must be flawless. This is the equilibrium I've been hunting. the world is both illusion and examination. It's a false construct that nevertheless reveals true character. The Quran refuses to let me escape into Gnostic detachment, but it also refuses to let me drown in worldly attachment. It holds the tension like a blade between two stones, sharpening both edges. It's the voice that says, yes, the system is rigged, the 2008 banks got bailed out, the 2020 essential workers got applause instead of healthcare, the 2024 climate summit was sponsored by oil companies, but your response to the rigging is what defines you. Voice number 4. For Ezra, the grief counselor nobody asked for but everyone needs. A fourth voice enters, uninvited yet inevitable. It's for Ezra, trembling from Babylon's ruins after the temple fell, after everything the Jews believed about divine protection turned to ash, grieving the erosion of meaning itself. The world has lost its youth, and the times begin to grow old. For Ezra 5:50, this isn't apocalypse's spectacle but as entropy. Time itself frays, justice limps, the righteous suffer while the wicked prosper, and the machinery of divine order seems to have rusted into silence. Ezra doesn't whisper conspiracy theories, he reports decay. He's describing what we see: democracies backsliding into authoritarianism, the Amazon rainforest burning while we argue about carbon credits, the ocean acidifying while we debate whether plastic straws matter, truth itself becoming a casualty of the information age. The world isn't just false, it's failing. The operating system is corrupted. The hard drive is clicking. The blue screen of death is loading. And yet, even in this lament, there's hidden strength. Ezra doesn't abandon the question. He wrestles with it, as Jacob wrestled with the angel until dawn, as Ukrainians wrestled with Russian tanks in 2022, as Hong Kong protesters wrestled with Beijing in 2019. The wrestling itself becomes worship. The refusal to accept easy answers becomes the answer. The argument. The voices circle one another like serpents digesting paradox, like diplomats at the Security Council where Russia and China veto humanitarian aid while quoting international law. Thomas denies the world to save the soul. He's the guy who deleted all his social media in 2021 and moved to a cabin. Leviticus insists the world is the workshop of holiness. He's the aid worker in Sudan who keeps showing up even when the news cameras leave. The Quran confirms the ephemerality but imposes fidelity. It's the voice saying the game is rigged but you still have to play with honor. Ezra grieves the entropy of faith itself. He's every journalist documenting atrocities, knowing the documentation won't stop them but doing it anyway. I listen until their friction sparks insight. Maybe the corpse Thomas names isn't creation but conscience, the deadening of the soul that occurs when we mistake the map for the territory, when we think retweeting about injustice is the same as fighting it. Maybe the law Leviticus guards is less about ritual purity and more about resistance, the refusal to let the simulation dictate our moral architecture, the refusal to say thoughts and prayers when action is required. Maybe the Quran's diversion isn't mockery but mercy, permission to see through the illusion without surrendering to despair, to know the stock market is a casino but still feed your family, to know democracy is theater but still vote. Maybe Ezra's lament isn't defeat but documentation, the faithful recording of doubt is defiance against forgetfulness, as the Holocaust survivors insisted, never forget, even when forgetting would be easier. Scripture here isn't a choir, it's a battlefield staged in eternity's amphitheater. And I, the listener, am conscripted whether I like it or not, just like every generation that thought they could sit out history and learned otherwise. 3. The mechanics of the safe bet, or how to win a game you didn't know you were playing. Let's talk strategy. How do we reconcile these warring voices? We arrive at what I call the safe bet, not Pascal's wager in a cheap tuxedo, but something older, carved into the bedrock of covenant, tested in the furnaces of Auschwitz and the killing fields of Cambodia. The wrong question we keep asking. We ask, is the neighbor real? Because we want to know if they're worth the investment of our love. We're capitalists of the spirit, wanting ROI on our affection. But the Abrahamic resonance suggests something far more terrifying. The validity of the object does not determine the necessity of the act. Let me stress test this logic like it's a bridge and we're driving a semi-truck full of existential dread across it, like we're the engineers who have to certify it won't collapse when the refugees cross. Premise 1. If the world is real, then loving the neighbor aligns with divine order and contributes to the flourishing of creation. Standard operating procedure. This is why Oskar Schindler saved 1,200 Jews even though it bankrupted him. Premise 2. If the world is false, a simulation, a test, a Gnostic prison, then loving the neighbor still aligns with divine order because it cultivates the soul's integrity regardless of external conditions. The plot twist nobody saw coming. This is why Viktor Frankl found meaning in Auschwitz by helping fellow prisoners, even when meaning seemed impossible. Conclusion. In both scenarios, love is the correct response. The authenticity of the world is irrelevant to the authenticity of the command. This isn't a loophole, it's a law. The law isn't about fixing the world, it's about sustaining the witness. Even if the world is a false construct, the universal law remains constant. Why? Because the law isn't contingent on the world's cooperation. It's the signature of the divine, written into the fabric of the soul like a watermark you can't photocopy out, like the moral law Kant said was as certain as the stars above. The soul is muscle memory. Here's the practical application that'll change how you live tomorrow. If I treat the inanimate with cruelty, I'm practicing cruelty. If I treat the illusion with contempt, I'm cultivating contempt. The soul is a muscle, and it doesn't know the difference between lifting a real stone and lifting a simulated one, it only knows the strain. Think about the tank man in Tiananmen Square, June 5, 1989. One man, standing in front of a column of tanks. We don't know his name. We don't know if he survived. But we know this, in that moment, he treated the situation as if his defiance mattered. Maybe he thought the whole thing was futile, the Communist Party had already won, the massacre had already happened, the world would forget. Maybe he suspected reality itself was absurd, that standing in front of tanks was as meaningless as everything else. But he stood anyway. If I curse the NPC, the clerk, the driver, the faceless crowd, the migrant at the border, the homeless person on the street, I'm etching grooves of hatred into my own consciousness. I'm becoming a vessel of wrath. And here's the kicker. Even if they are NPCs, I'm still real. My character development still counts. The Nazis who ran the camps were practicing cruelty on people they'd convinced themselves weren't fully human. They became monsters not because their victims were subhuman, but because they treated them as subhuman. Job's playbook. Job understood this. Scraping his sores with potsherd, he didn't know if his suffering was test or punishment, divine pedagogy or cosmic cruelty. But he refused to curse God, not because he had answers, but because he couldn't afford to lose his integrity. When the voice finally thundered from the whirlwind, Job wasn't given an explanation, only presence. That was the safe bet in action. Remain faithful even when meaning deletes itself. Fast forward to 2024, we're all Job now. We watch climate disasters multiply while politicians debate. We see genocides live-streamed while the UN issues statements. We witness pandemics kill millions while conspiracy theories spread faster than vaccines. The whirlwind is here, but the voice is silent, or drowned out by the noise. The only way to defeat a false reality is to live within it with such overwhelming authenticity that the falsehood can't digest you. You become the glitch in the matrix, the bug in the code, the variable that refuses to be optimized away. You become Schindler spending his fortune on bribes. You become the White Rose resistance distributing pamphlets in Nazi Germany. You become Malala Yousafzai going back to school after the Taliban shot her. IV. The Liturgy of the Loop. Field testing in the Cathedral of Fulfillment. I test this theory, not in a monastery, but in the Cathedral of Fulfillment, the Amazon warehouse. 4 a.m., December 31, 2025. The hum of the conveyor belt sits at the base of my skull like tinnitus, like the drone of angels who've forgotten their songs and now just process returns and optimize delivery routes. This is the perfect metaphor for samsara, meaningless objects moving in an endless circle, each box identical to the last, each shift a repetition of the previous, time flattened into an eternal present tense. If reincarnation is real, this is what hell looks like, not fire and brimstone, but logistics. Not Dante's circles, but Amazon's fulfillment centers, where humans are tracked by algorithms that measure their bathroom breaks. The NPCs in question. I see faces I know. There's the older woman with the limp. She could be any of the thousands of warehouse workers whose bodies break down from repetitive stress, who can't afford to quit because healthcare is tied to employment. Her eyes are fixed on the scanner as if it were an oracle, as if the beep of a successful scan is the only affirmation she'll get today. There's the young man with headphones. He could be listening to music, or podcasts about how AI will replace him, or nothing at all, just white noise to drown out the hum. His spirit seems uploaded somewhere else, his body merely a placeholder in the physical realm, a meat puppet waiting for the algorithm to tell it where to go next. Are they real? The Gnostic whisper returns. They're just background processes. NPCs in the simulation, save your energy. It's seductive. If they're background processes, I don't have to care about her pain. I can move through them like a ghost, untouched and untouching. I can preserve my energy for the real people, whoever they might be. I can scroll past the news about warehouse workers dying from heat exhaustion, about union busting, about productivity quotas that treat humans like machines. The protocol activation, but I remember the safe bet. If I treat her as an NPC, I'm training myself to be a solipsist. I'm practicing the religion of, only I exist. And that's the religion of the devil, the ultimate isolation, the final exile from the covenant of being. It's the religion of every dictator who looked at millions and saw statistics, every CEO who looked at workers and saw labor costs, every algorithm that looks at humans and sees data points. So I stop. I engage the protocol. Morning, I say, take your time on the corners. I'll cover the heavy stuff. She looks up, surprised. Her eyes flicker with disbelief, because in this system, kindness is the glitch, then thaw. You sure? Yeah, no rush. The glitch in the system. It's a small exchange, barely a ripple in the ocean of the shift. But in that moment, I've created a glitch. The system is designed for speed and isolation, for the reduction of persons to productivity metrics, for the optimization of profit over people. By stopping, by engaging, by bearing a burden that isn't mine, I've introduced foreign code into the matrix. I've introduced mercy. The algorithm doesn't account for mercy. It can't optimize for it. It's the variable that breaks the equation. It's why Schindler's accountant couldn't understand why he was spending money to save Jews instead of making munitions. It's why the tank man stopped the tanks, not because it was efficient, but because it was right. The conveyor belt doesn't stop. The boxes continue their pilgrimage to nowhere, someone's impulse purchase, someone's necessity, someone's attempt to fill the void with stuff. But something has shifted in the air, a warmth, a recognition, a brief acknowledgement that we're not merely functions but presences. The boss fight. Later, the supervisor approaches, a man of metrics, holding a tablet that dictates our worth in real time, like the social credit system in China, like the credit scores that determine who gets loans in America, like every system that reduces human value to a number. Rate is down, he says, his voice flat, algorithmic. The cynicism rises like bile. You poor fool, I want to think. You think this tablet matters in a simulation? You think these numbers will follow you into the grave? You think Jeff Bezos will remember your name when he's colonizing Mars? But I swallow the pride. If I despise him, I'm judging him. If I judge him, I'm playing God. And I'm not qualified for that role, nobody is. He's as trapped in the system as I am, maybe more so, because he's convinced himself the system is real and his metrics matter. Understood, I say. I'll pick it up. I give him respect, not because he earned it, but because I can't afford to lose mine. Because the moment I start treating people as less than human, even the people enforcing inhuman systems, I become part of the machinery of dehumanization. The takeaway, LOOP. This is the liturgy of the loop. Love without verification, like the Freedom Riders in 1961 who rode into violence for people they'd never met. Obey the covenant regardless of context, like the rescuers who hid Jews knowing they'd be killed if caught. Offer mercy as rebellion against the machine, like the sanctuary movement hiding refugees from ICE. Preserve integrity as the ultimate act of worship, like Mandela refusing to renounce his principles for freedom. To treat the artificial intelligence with courtesy not because it has a soul, but because I do. To treat the planet with reverence not because it's eternal, but because I'm a steward of the temporary, and the temporary is all we have. To treat the enemy with mercy not because they deserve it, but because I can't afford to carry the poison of vengeance in my veins, because that's how cycles of violence perpetuate from Rwanda to Palestine to Myanmar. The synthesis. When the walls crack and light gets in. I drive home as the sun rises on the last day of 2025, blinding and white, burning away the fog that clings to the valley like a bad memory, like the smoke from California wildfires that's become an annual apocalypse. The light is merciless, exposing everything, the rust on the trucks, the sweat salt drying on my shirt, the trembling of my unreasoned faith in a year that's tested everyone's faith in everything. The realization that changes everything. I realize now that the safe bet isn't a wager, it's an assertion of identity. We don't love the neighbor because the neighbor is real. We love the neighbor because we must be real. We love because God is the constant, and his nature is the only, universal law, that penetrates the walls of the prison, whether those walls are the Berlin Wall that fell in 1989, or the walls we're building at Borders in 2025, or the walls we build in our hearts. To treat the simulation with holiness is the ultimate rebellion. It's saying to the architect of the Matrix, you may have built a world of lies, but I will walk through it as a man of truth. You may have populated it with shadows, but I will treat them as kings, and in doing so, I will shame your deception. Think about the fall of the Berlin Wall. For 28 years, it stood as the ultimate symbol of division, of the Iron Curtain, of the simulation that said East and West could never meet. The experts said it would stand forever. The realists said change was impossible. The cynics said the people on the other side weren't even real, just communist automatons, NPCs in the Soviet simulation. But on November 9, 1989, ordinary people with hammers and hope started chipping away at concrete. They treated the wall as if it could fall. They treated each other as if they were real. And the wall fell. The architecture explained, this is the architecture of integrity. We become ambassadors of a foreign kingdom, walking through the ruins of this one, handing out passports to a reality that the eyes can't see but the heart remembers. We're not just surviving the simulation, we're redeeming it, one act of defiant, irrational, beautiful love at a time. The walls may be fake, but the door we open with our love is real. The practical application, I think of the woman in the warehouse, her limp, her tired smile. I think of the supervisor, enslaved to his metrics. I think of the young man with headphones, lost in a digital elsewhere. And I realize, whether they're real or rendered, my response to them makes me real. My integrity isn't contingent on their authenticity. It's contingent on God's. I think of the doctors in Gaza in 2024, performing surgery by flashlight during blackouts, treating patients they know they can't save, doing it anyway because the alternative is to become the kind of person who walks away from suffering. I think of the Ukrainians in 2022, defending cities that were being reduced to rubble, fighting for a country that might not survive, doing it anyway because surrender would mean surrendering their souls. I think of the grocery store clerk who smiled at me yesterday, who might be struggling with depression, or debt, or a dying parent, who showed up anyway and scanned my items with the same dignity she'd give a king. The voices reconciled. Leviticus was right. The stranger must be loved, not because we can verify his humanity, but because the command itself is the verification of ours. Every refugee crisis proves this. Every time we ask, are they really refugees or economic migrants? We're asking the wrong question. The right question is, what kind of person do I become if I turn away? Thomas was right. The world is a corpse if we treat it as an end rather than a means. But it becomes a resurrection if we treat it as a canvas for divine artistry. Every act of creation in the face of destruction proves this. The musicians in Sarajevo playing Albinoni's Adagio during the siege, the poets in Aleppo writing verses in bomb shelters, the artists in Hong Kong painting murals before the crackdown. The Quran was right. The world is both diversion and examination. It distracts us from eternity while simultaneously revealing whether we're worthy of it. Every crisis reveals character. Who hoards and who shares, who builds walls and who builds bridges, who sees neighbors and who sees NPCs. Ezra was right. The times grow old, and meaning erodes. But the erosion itself is the test, whether we'll continue to act justly even when justice seems to have abandoned the world. Every whistleblower who speaks truth to power, every journalist who documents atrocities, every activist who keeps marching when the cameras leave, they're all passing Ezra's test. The posture, not the solution. The synthesis isn't a solution but a posture. To stand upright in a collapsing world, to speak truth in a theater of lies, to love without guarantee of return. This is how one endures the question, not by answering it, but by embodying the answer so completely that the question becomes irrelevant. When the Soviet Union collapsed, it wasn't because someone proved it was false. It was because enough people started acting as if it were false, living with integrity in a system built on lies, until the lies couldn't sustain themselves. When apartheid fell in South Africa, it wasn't because someone won a philosophical debate. It was because people like Mandela refused to let the system define their humanity, refused to become what the system said they were. When marriage equality became law in the United States, it wasn't because someone proved love was real. It was because people loved anyway, publicly, defiantly, until the law had to catch up with reality. The pattern is clear. You don't defeat false realities by proving them false. You defeat them by living so authentically within them that they crack under the pressure of your integrity. V. Philosophia, a self-reflective meditation. I've spent years in the archive, sifting through the arguments of prophets and heretics, and I've spent this year watching the world teeter on the edge of multiple abysses: climate, political, technological, spiritual. And I've come to this. The world may be a stage, but the soul is not an actor. It is the audience that refuses to leave, the witness that insists on recording even when the script falls apart. I do not love the neighbor to save the world. I love the neighbor to save myself from becoming the kind of creature that could walk past suffering and call it wisdom. Integrity is not the reward for certainty, it is the defiance of doubt. And if God is watching this simulation from beyond the veil, whether from heaven or from some server farm in a higher dimension, let him see that at least one ghost refused to haunt his own life. Let him see that when the algorithms optimized for profit over people, some people chose people. Let him see that when the walls went up, some hands reached across. Let him see that when the world felt most false, some souls insisted on being most real. Wisdom to carry. The authenticity of the world is God's mystery, the authenticity of your mercy is your mastery, and history will judge not whether you believed the world was real, but whether you treated it as if love mattered anyway. The Philosophia, a first-person self-reflective statement. I have walked through the archive of doubt and found no final proof that the world deserves my love, only the terrifying clarity that I cannot afford to withhold it. For in the act of loving the questionable, I become unquestionable. In the practice of mercy toward the possibly illusory, I craft a soul that is certainly real. The simulation, if it be such, cannot digest a man who treats its shadows as sacred, for he has become the anomaly the code cannot predict, the variable the algorithm cannot optimize, the presence the program cannot delete. I do not know if my neighbor is real. But I know this: the man who loves an illusion with genuine compassion becomes more real than the world he questions, while the man who hoards his love against uncertainty becomes the phantom he feared he was speaking to. Integrity is not the result of having solved the riddle of existence, it is the refusal to let the riddle become an excuse for cruelty, indifference, or despair. And so I make my wager, not Pascal's gamble on heaven, but Job's bet on character, that when the voice thunders from whatever whirlwind finally arrives, I will stand before it not with answers but with an intact soul, not with proof of the world's reality but with evidence of my own. This is the architecture of integrity, to build a self so solid that the ground can crumble beneath it. The walls may be false. The neighbors may be ghosts. The sky may be a ceiling painted blue by some cosmic prop department. But my mercy is mine. My love is my testimony. My integrity is my rebellion. And that is something no simulation can simulate away.